Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Raymore City Council regular meeting for Monday, May the 23rd, 2022. I'll call the meeting to order and ask for the roll call, please.
Councilmember Abdelgawad.
Here.
Councilmember Barber.
Present.
Councilmember Berenson.
Present.
Councilmember Burke.
Present.
Councilmember Forster.
Present.
Councilmember Holman.
Present.
Councilmember Townsend.
Present.
Councilmember Wills.
Present.
And Mayor Turnbow.
Present. We have a quorum. Before we rise for the pledge tonight, though, I would ask that you join me in a moment of silence for Pat Melville. He's an 18-year veteran of our Public Works Department. Passed away suddenly of a heart attack yesterday working in the yard. Pat came here to the city, has done exemplary work for the Public Works Department, ingratiated himself to many people here. Super nice guy, and he will be missed. And please keep his family and him in your thoughts and prayers. Thank you. Now, if you'd please rise and join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And tonight we have a couple of presentations and awards. We have the Mark 50 Forward Proclamation. I didn't know I was given that one, guys. Is it in the cabinet there, I hope? Okay. All right. And then we have the Arbor Day Proclamation. I do remember signing these now. It's been a while. If you'd please come forward. And you are?
James Stowe.
Hi, James. Chris Turnbow. Nice to meet you, sir. So we do have a proclamation tonight. It's for the Mark 50 Forward Day Award or Proclamation. It's a rather lengthy proclamation, but I'd like to read it so everybody will understand it. It says, whereas for half a century, local governments in the Kansas City region have come together through the Mid-America Regional Council to partner on regional initiatives and develop innovative solutions. And whereas the region consists of 9 counties and 119 cities, which benefit from working across boundaries on a wide variety of issues and coordinating with diverse disciplines and sectors, including cities, counties, nonprofit organizations, social services, educational systems, and special districts. And whereas the region's leaders engage in informed decision-making through insightful data analysis, and participate in a problem-solving forum to positively impact progress. And whereas each jurisdiction and individual has a role in creating a strong regional community and enabling everyone to come together to achieve positive change for the next 50 years. And whereas MARC is an organization that promotes regional cooperation through leadership, planning, and action, and is guided by the core values of integrity, innovation, collaboration, diversity and inclusion, excellence in performance, and service leadership. And whereas the City of Raymore has participated or benefit from working across boundaries, allowing us to better serve residents because of our regional work regarding public safety, transportation, environment, early learning, aging, and shared local government services. And whereas members of the City of Raymore celebrate the collaborative work that's been accomplished over the past 50 years and dedicate June 10th, 2022, the day of MARC's annual regional assembly, as Mark 50 Forward Day, in recognition of the enormous progress the region will continue to make over the next 5 decades. Now therefore I, Christopher P. Turnbow, Mayor of the City of Raymore, do hereby proclaim June 10th, 2022 as Mark 50 Forward Day, and urge local leaders and community members to reflect on the great progress made in the past 50 years and join us in welcoming a future built upon strong regional collaboration, connections, relationships, and accomplishments, in witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the City of Raymore to be affixed this 23rd day of May 2022. thank you for being here tonight. I would like to say that the Mid-America Regional Council has been on one specific event, and this one alone has been extremely beneficial. They have, through our work effort here on a regional, northern Cass County, to do something with the widening of I-49 and the interchange at 58 Highway, Mark has now pushed that up on their priority list, understanding the collaborative efforts that have been garnered here, as well as with the Mid-America Regional Council. And David Warm, your executive director, and I have talked on many occasions about that project, and that relationship has been extremely beneficial, and we're hoping that we'll see some progress on that in the near future. But also the housing and public safety, we couldn't, as many are outlined here, we couldn't thank you enough for what Mid-America Regional Council has done for this community and will continue to do. So thank you very much. I'll give you that. Would you like the floor?
Well, I don't think there's much to add to this proclamation, but we just stand in respect and awe of the city of Raymore and look forward to 50 more years of progress. Thank you.
Very much. All right. And do we have, is our Parks Director? There he is. Nathan, if you'd please step forward to accept this proclamation. This is our Arbor Day proclamation. Whereas in 1872, J. Sterling Morton proposed to the Nebraska Board of Agriculture that a special day be set aside for the planting of trees, and whereas this holiday, called Arbor Day, was first observed with the planting of more than 1 million trees in Nebraska and is now observed throughout the nation and the world, and whereas trees can reduce the erosion, cut heating and cooling costs, moderate the temperature, clean the air, produce life-giving oxygen, and provide habitat for wildlife, and whereas trees are a renewable resource, giving us paper, wood for our homes, fuel for our fires, and countless other wood products, and increase property values, enhance the economic vitality of business areas, and beautify our community. Now, therefore, I, Christopher P. Turnbull, Mayor of the City of Raymore, do hereby proclaim May 23rd, 2022 as Arbor Day in the City of Raymore, and do encourage all citizens to celebrate Arbor Day by planting a tree in support of efforts to protect our trees and woodlands for future generations, in witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the City of Raymore to be affixed this 23rd day of May 2022. And on behalf of the city, Nathan is accepting this. His department does a lot to keep our trees in shape in town and plant new ones on a regular basis and help others who look for guidance for planting trees through our Parks Department. So we appreciate everything you guys do over at the Parks Department.
Thank you, sir.
And now we'll move on to staff reports. Mr. Furborn.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would ask Mr. Krass to make a staff report for Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Furborn, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Just wanted to update council on a couple of training opportunities that we are taking advantage of now that the world is returning to a little bit more normalcy. Last week, as part of our Public Works Week, we had a trainer on site to go over trenching and excavation safety. Tomorrow morning, we have a trainer coming in for flagger and traffic control certification. Mr. Mayor, I want to thank you for honoring Pat's memory this evening as well. Thank you, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, sir. Any questions of staff? Thank you, Mike. Mr. Furborn.
Thank you, Mr. Krass. I would ask Mr. Mustine to make a report for Parks and Recreation.
Thanks, sir, Mayor, members of the council. I submitted a written report, got a couple items I wanted to highlight. This Wednesday, we will be dewinterizing the spray ground, preparing it for opening day. We'll announce that opening day once all the pipes and everything is primed and the chemicals are through and we know that it's operating safely. and anticipate no problems with that, so be looking for that announcement. Also, the farmers market is coming up. I put that in your packet, but first day of farmers market is it is actually the first Tuesday of June, so that's coming up real quick, right behind us here on Municipal Circle. Looking forward to that. Summer day camp starts on June 6th. That's a fast school year. The summer day camp comes around pretty quick. So staff is working really hard getting prepared for that. Looking forward to a great summer with the children over at the RAC. We have a movie night in the park on June 17th. I won't be before you prior to that event, so I wanted to make that announcement. That'll be at TB Hanna Station. And the movie is Sing 2, the sequel there. And then we do have a special announcement this weekend, May 26th through June 6th, actually. Creekside Market down on 58 Highway is doing a fundraiser for the Hawks Nest, our all-inclusive playground. A percentage of sales during that particular time, which is May 26th through June 6th, will go towards the Hawk Nest through our foundation. It's pretty much anything they sell except tropicals and shrubs. So if you guys or anybody in the community is looking to purchase some items, go to Creekside and we'll take a percentage of that towards our playground. And that concludes my report. Happy to answer any questions, sir.
Thank you, Nathan. Any questions, Mr. Mustine? Yes, Ms. Abdullah.
Just a quick question. That the fundraiser at Creekside, is there information on social media about that we could help share?
I believe there will be. I don't know
Not
that
yet.
it's out yet. Have we posted that yet? Tomorrow.
Okay, so starting tomorrow, we
You
can
heard it
share
here
that
first.
and help get the word out about it.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, Mr. Mustine. I would ask Ms. Harmer to make a communications report.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. If you haven't received, hopefully everyone has received the review. Most of these news articles will be coming online as press releases soon if we haven't already published about them. I wanted to mention a couple upcoming events. June 4th in Belton at the Yoakum Center is annual Household Hazardous Waste Mobile Collection, and that is in partnership with Mark that we just had the proclamation about, so with their Solid Waste Management District. June 4th, 8 a.m. to noon or until the trucks are full, so that's a great way to get rid of used oil and chemicals and household products that you just can't throw in the trash. And also an e-waste recycling event is Saturday, June 25th in our front City Hall parking lot here. Old computers, printers, copiers, almost anything with a cord. Most of it's free except for a few monitors and LCD TVs. There's a fee with that, but everything else is free to dispose of safely and responsibly. And working on the final plans for Summer Scene Arts and Music Festival. That's Saturday, June 11th at TB Hanna Station. We'll have free face painting, plein air painting contest with free watercolor paint kits to the first 50 or so people that want to show up for that. Giveaways, food and drinks, live music from Bradley Harris, interactive square dancing with the Livewire Square Dance Club, and then our headliners are the BMW Band, which is an excellent jazz band. I don't know if you've heard them. They've played around here, but not in Raymore quite yet, so this will be the Raymore debut. And that concludes my report for this evening.
Any questions of Melissa? Thank you. Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, Ms. Harmer. I would ask Mr. Dylan Apert to make a report on the comprehensive plan.
If I could interject for just 1 second, while Mr. Eppert is making his way up, I'm going to take control of your screens. Mr. Eppert has an app he would like to demonstrate to the council this evening.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. Tonight, just my typical update is going to be a little different as we're going through a tour of the interactive map that we've kind of been building up for some excitement. And we now have the landing page where essentially anyone in the community go to raymore.com/community, and it will actually take you to this educational page where it kind of tells you what the future land use plan is, why it's important, and how you can help. There's a couple of questions that we have throughout the bottom here. Businesses that you'd like to see, downtown area, where you would like to see a downtown area, Also, items like beautification, what you would like to see in specific areas as far as public art. There's two different areas in which you can click. You can either click up here at the top where it says click here to view the map, or you can go to the interactive map. If you click on that, it'll actually take you to 5 different areas in which staff is identified as an activity center. And you can either click on the sides here, or you can click on a specific area. And this is what is known as the pork shop, Good Ranch Tract 1. And there will be a brief synopsis of essentially what city staff has identified this area for. But the ultimate reason to have this is so that you can click here and add a comment. And so, as you can see, if I go back here, there's actually been somebody who's already placed a comment, as this was just launched early last week. This is to try and get that out there to where anybody in the community can have that say and help us progress through as we go through the comprehensive plan. But wanted to give you all just a synopsis of how this works, and it's pretty simple. The way we wanted to set it up was that pretty much anybody that has internet access has the ability to do something like this. And so this is concludes staff report.
Okay. Thank you, Dylan. Any questions of Dylan? Yes, Ms. Forster.
So this is only going to show future. It's not going to show like what's currently going on. So if there's a project that's coming in front of us, it's not going to be on here for people to make comments, or is it to help decide what to do with it beforehand?
So all this is, aside from one note here, so you'll actually see the 58 corridor, which is a redevelopment opportunity, but everything else in here is undeveloped area, and so the last thing we want to do is develop it in a way that the city does not foresee it to be developed. And so these are areas that would require a master plan, and so when someone comes in for a pre-app with city staff, we already know what the playbook is, and we can give that developer what it is that we're looking for as a city, so that they come in and we don't waste their time and they don't waste ours. So, yes, ma'am.
Anyone else? Right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Dearborn?
Reaper. A reminder to the council that next week is the 5th Monday, also a national holiday, so there will be no work session next week. The next work session will be the following Monday. Currently 2 items on the agenda for the city council, as we have discussed previously. We'll be outlining PUDs and discussing a possible future tree ordinance. That includes staff reports tonight, sir.
Thank you, sir. Any questions of Mr. Fearborn? Yes, Mr. Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I meant to ask earlier when during the last presentation, will the information gathered in that is being used for the community conversation, or will it be a part of that event?
The entirety of the comprehensive plan that we're developing is for the community conversation, with this being a spot that's interactive ahead of time for the land use plan portion of the comprehensive plan.
Gotcha. Anyone else? Anything? Okay. We have no committee reports tonight, so we'll move on to the consent agenda. We only have one item under the consent agenda tonight, which is the City Council meeting minutes of May 9th, 2022. I'd entertain a motion to dispose of the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
I move that we approve consent agenda item A, City Council minutes for May the 9th, 2022.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. The motion's been made and seconded to approve the consent agenda. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 8-0. We'll now move on to unfinished business. Could I please have the second reading of Bill 3713 by title only?
The second reading of Bill 3713 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with Sands Construction, LLC for the West Hawk Ridge Park improvements in the amount of $480,070.85.
If there are no further questions of staff, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
I move that we approve Bill 3713, award of contract to Sands Construction, LLC, West Hawk Ridge Park improvements.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Yes, sir. I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. The motion has been made and seconded to approve the second reading of Bill 3713. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 8-0. Thank you. Could I please have the second reading of Bill 3714 by title only?
The second reading of Bill 3714 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri authorizing an amendment to the fiscal year 2021 capital budget.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
move that we approve the second reading of Bill 3714, Budget Amendment, West Hawk Ridge Park Improvements.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I will second the motion, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. The motion has been made and seconded to approve the second reading of Bill 3714. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 8-0. Could I please have the second reading of Bill 3718 by title only?
The second reading of Bill 3718 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri approving and authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with Aquatic Control Incorporated to provide pond and lake management services.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
move that we approve the second reading of Bill 3718, award of contract to Aquatic Control Incorporated for pond and lake management services.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Yes, sir. I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the second reading of Bill 3718. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 8-0. Could I please have the second reading of Bill 3719 by title only?
The second reading of Bill 3719 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with McClure Engineering Company for the Centerview Detention Area Design Project in the amount of $29,200.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
move that we approve the second reading of Bill 3719, award of contract to McClure Engineering Company, Centerview Detention Area Design.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
I will second the motion, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. The motion has been made and seconded to approve the second reading of Bill 3719. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 8-0. Could I please have the second reading of Bill 3722 by title only?
The second reading of Bill 3722 by title only, an ordinance authorizing and directing submission to the voters of the City of Raymore, Missouri at the election of August 2nd, 2022, the proposal to authorize the imposition of a use tax for general revenue purposes at a rate equal to the current sales tax rate of 2.50% in the City of Raymore, Missouri.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
move that we approve the second reading of Bill 3722, calling for the August 2nd, 2022 online use tax election.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the second reading of Bill 3722. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 8-0. Could I please have the second reading of Bill 3721 by title only?
The second reading of Bill 3721 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, directing the city manager to initiate the procedures required pursuant to Chapter 523 of the Revised Statutes of Missouri for the acquisition of all necessary rights-of-way, temporary easements, and permanent easements to complete the Ward Road Improvement Project, Project 360201.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
I move that we approve the second reading of Bill 3721, Ward Road Eminent Domain Property Acquisition, Chapter 523.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion, sir.
Thank you, sir. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the second reading of Bill 3721. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Opposed? Motion carries 7 yes, 1 no. Now move on to new business. Could I please have the first reading of, hold on, we're on a utility easement vacation. So this item is an application approval, I assume?
Yes, sir, if I may explain.
Yeah, okay, go ahead and.
The application was put in by the resident of the property and then removed, but it was removed after we had advertised for a public hearing. So because the public hearing had been advertised for the installation of the pool, we felt that even though there is no bill to go with this or positive action to be taken by the council, we should put it on in case someone appeared for the public hearing so that Mr. Gress can explain what has occurred here. So if we could just proceed to the staff report, I'll call on Mr. Gress.
Okay, sounds great.
Thank you, sir. As Mr. Fearborn mentioned, staff was approached by the homeowner there at 813 Bridgeshire within the Creekmore subdivision. That subdivision is famous for 25-foot setbacks in the rear yard and, on top of that, a 25-foot utility easement. On many occasions, to facilitate the construction of a backyard pool, a portion of that easement has to be vacated. So staff was originally approached by the property owner here, and through our research after that application was filed, when that home was actually constructed, the builder at the time had already vacated the utility easement, and so it was determined that no further action was necessary, and they were able to proceed forward with the construction of their pool. As Mr. Fearborn indicated, we advertised that in the Journal as required by city code, and after that is when the applicant withdrew their application at their request, and so staff felt it was important to still have the item on tonight in case there was any residents that showed up to speak for or against that utility vacation. So that would conclude staff report.
All right, thank you. So there's no action necessary, Mr. Zur?
You might want to perhaps open the public hearing and ask if there's any public input just in case someone showed up for an application that doesn't exist, sir.
Okay, all right. I can open a public hearing at this time and ask if anybody's concerned about the address at 813 Bridgeshire Drive. Please step forward, state your name and address for the record, and try to keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. I see no one stepping forward, so I'll close the public hearing at this time, and we'll move on to the next item.
Lack of motion.
There you go. Okay. All right, so we'll move on to item B. Could I please have the first reading of Bill 3725 by title only?
The first reading of Bill 3725 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, amending the zoning map from BP, Business Park District, to PUD, Planned Unit Development District, and approving the preliminary development plan for Raymore Commerce Center South, a 262.09 acre tract of land located south of 195th Street, east of Interstate 49 in Raymore, Cass County, Missouri.
Thank you. I'll open this, the public hearing at this time and ask for a staff report.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would ask Mr. Gress to open the staff report portion of this item.
Thank you, sir. The request this evening before the council is a request for rezoning and the approval of a preliminary development plan for Raymore Commerce Center South. The application was filed by Van Trust Real Estate on behalf of the current property owner, Double G Properties, for this piece of land. And I'll go into the brief history of the property here before I go too further. The property is located south of 195th Street, generally on the east side of I-49, currently zoned business park. And the growth management plan within the city's comprehensive plan identifies this property as appropriate for business park type development, and it classifies both Dean Avenue and 195th Street as minor arterial roadways. Because this evening does require a public hearing, this meeting was advertised in the May 5th edition of the Journal newspaper, and items of record for this evening include the mailed notices to adjoining property owners, the notice of publication, the Unified Development Code, the application, the growth management plan, the staff report, the applicant's preliminary development plan, and the draft MOU as part of this. And there are some additional exhibits that we presented to you as part of the applicant's presentation as well. To look into the history of this specific property, this area of the city is governed more or less by what is referred to as the Good Ranch MOU, or the Good Ranch Master Plan, or Master Land Use Plan. And that was a plan that was approved on March 16th of 1994, which is the same time that this property and everything else within the Good Ranch was annexed into the city. The subject property here is identified on that plan as tracts 22, 23, and 24. On that master land use plan, At its inception, Tract 22, which is the western portion of this property, was originally identified as CM, or commercial manufacturing, and Tracts 23 and 24 were identified as single family. In 2010, the property owner amended that land use plan to show all three tracts, Tracts 22, 23, and 24, as appropriate for a business park designation. The property was then rezoned from its previous agricultural zoning district to its current business park zoning district designation on January 10th of 2011. And in 2013, the current owner, Double G Properties, submitted a request to obtain a conditional use permit, which would allow for warehousing and distribution on the entirety of that 260-acre site. As part of that application, that included a proposed site plan that showed 29 individual lots that would have been developed over time. And I included kind of a layout of what that proposed site plan looked like. At their November 19th, 2013 meeting, the Planning Commission voted 7-1 to deny that request for a CUP on the property. The main reasoning being that they felt that the request would have granted a blanket CUP over all 29 individual lots with no certainty of development at the time, and it was deemed necessary to evaluate that specific development plan more on a case-by-case basis, given the large number of lots or individual lots in that development. So because of that, the applicant did choose to withdraw their request, and it never made it to the city council at that point. And that was really the last application that was filed on that property until now. Included within your packet, a Good Neighbor meeting was held on April 27th here in the council chambers regarding this request. 4 residents, in addition to city staff and the development team, were present at that meeting, and Mr. Eppert has included a very good synopsis of what some of the questions and answers and some of the comments that were made and given to the folks that were in attendance of that meeting. On the staff comments, before I get too far into that, I wanted to explain more or less the purpose of the PUD and why that is the tool that is being proposed to be utilized here. The PUD allows for, not necessarily any changes to the use of the property, but more or less how the plan that is included in your packet that the applicant has proposed would be implemented over time. It's a little bit different than the traditional site plan phase that would be afforded by the existing business park zoning district. And so the PUD, in addition to the MOU that comes with that, does provide flexibility in the process that city staff and the applicant would go through if this does get approved to basically finalize the final site plans for each of these buildings that have been proposed. And I'm happy to answer any more specific questions on that as well. But the MOU and the master land use plan for the Good Ranch, again, were approved back in 1994, and I kind of went into the history of these tracts. The business park designation within the growth management plan is identified as an area that's intended to accommodate office, research and development, limited service, manufacturing, and warehousing uses that would be located in a campus-like setting. The site's design would include larger setbacks, increased landscaping and buffering from non-related uses, and public rights-of-way. That's more or less the description of the current zoning designation for that property. Also within your staff report, I've included the existing development standards for the business park district as well as the proposed PUD development standards, and you'll note there's minor variations in that. As I mentioned, the nature of the PUD is more the tool that would be used to implement the project, more or less. Included within that also is the parking standards. The UDC outlines very specific parking requirements that would be outlined for both office uses, manufacturing uses, trucking and freight terminal uses, and warehouses and wholesaling. In addition to this plan, the applicant has proposed a parking ratio of approximately 1 per 2,500 square feet of building area for these buildings. And there's a small explanation of kind of why that is being requested. And as the council may know, a lot of times these buildings are constructed more or less on a spec basis, meaning they're built before a tenant has committed to a lease. And so by tying the specific parking requirements to the shell of a building, we don't necessarily know who would occupy that building. And so you run the risk of building necessarily perhaps too much parking that might not necessarily be needed, depending on what specific requirements a tenant might have. More often than not, and in my experience, is that a tenant that would look in these buildings would have a very specific parking requirement that they're looking for, which is oftentimes larger than what this 1 per 2,500 square foot would be. So the impetus would be to avoid constructing or overly constructing the parking on the front end of the project and allow additional parking to be added in the future if needed. and that prohibits from, a large sea of asphalt from being constructed that isn't necessarily needed. And so staff provided our thoughts on that request. We do feel, based on the information that the applicant provided, that is a reasonable request. And again, that is outlined in the staff report as well. Also included with that is a list of the currently approved and the proposed uses within the property. I will point out here the major change is allowing a warehousing and wholesaling use as a permitted use in the PUD based on the proposed layout, as opposed to a conditional use, which is what it's classified in under the current zoning of the property. The reclassification of zoning to a PUD does require the creation of an MOU, and that has been included in your packet this evening as well. And again, I kind of outlined the principal use and the reasoning for the PUD request as well. The zoning and land use of the property would remain consistent with the plan that was approved back in 1994. Both North Gas Parkway and Dean Avenue at this point have been designed and constructed to handle the traffic that would be generated in this area, and the improvements that have been proposed as part of this development as well have been determined to be sufficient to support the development that would come out of this area as well. The main difference here between a traditional zoning district and the PUD is that as part of this request, we're not only looking at the use of the property, but more specifically the plan that the developer has put together to build out on this property over time. And so as part of that, whatever action happens or takes place tonight, that is the main difference between a traditional zoning district, is that the council and the community now knows generally what this property would look like and how it would be developed over time if it does get approved. Again, under the current BP zoning district, the minimum design standards that are defined in section 440, those outline building design characteristics that would be required. I just wanted to point out that under those design standards, this would be considered what is an industrially zoned property under the business park designation as it relates to that section of code. And so only those minimum standards that are outlined in the UDC would apply. And I only say that because the industrially zoned properties in the city are the only ones where metal buildings would be sufficient, with or without some additional stone cladding or some improvements. That's the distinction that the code breaks between a commercial or professional office use and what would be considered an industrial use within the UDC. And within that MOU, it does include the preliminary plan as well as the elevations that have been proposed as part of this project. The Planning Commission at their May 17th meeting did vote 8-0 to approve this and submitted their Planning Commission findings of fact. I will note that the Planning Commission did vote to recommend approval of the application with the stipulation that the applicant work a little bit closer with staff to get a better understanding of the traffic on 195th. That was one of the major concerns that came up at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. And so last week, we did have a couple meetings with the applicant to discuss some improvements that could be looked at, and that will be discussed here as part of their presentation this evening. But I did want to note what the Commission's direction was and note that we did have those discussions last week after that meeting. I know the applicant is looking forward to sharing some of those changes with you all this evening. In short, the subject property, based on its location, is an ideal location for this type of development, with the highway frontage that presents a good opportunity for visibility along I-49. Proximity to the interchange provides good logical access to the property, and the proposed development is majorly consistent with the Good Ranch Master Plan, which is what generally guides the development of this area of the city. Not every area of the city is under the jurisdiction, if you will, of an overarching MOU. The city staff does recommend that the city council accept the staff proposed findings of fact and the Planning Commission findings of fact, and does recommend approval of this application. Again, within the packet is the MOU as well, and so I'm happy to answer any additional questions on that. That would conclude my staff report at this time. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gress. Any questions of Mr. Gress? Mr. Townsend?
There we go. Turn the microphone on. Thank you, Mr. Gress. Excellent report this evening. I had some questions on the traffic plan as you're looking at the packet here, some of the information that was provided and the conceptual designs that P&Z was looking at, particularly on like page 5, excuse me, on 168, the MOU piece, which shows the big black line that going through, it's a road, going through the middle of the property, which would have spoken to the T that would have got traffic going directly in. It's my understanding that there has been some changes to some the properties that now requires the existing concept that's been presented where it kind of goes on the perimeter along I-49. So because of that change in property ownership, that's kind of what's driving why we can't do the T. It's nothing as far as the development is concerned. It's just that there's some property ownership there that we cannot disturb, for lack of a better term. Is that correct in my assumption?
You're correct, and I referenced the Good Ranch Master Plan, which originally showed the alignment of Dean Avenue. If you can look at the conceptual site plan, on the north side of 195th is Ranch Road, which leads into the Good Ranch property. The original plan showed that as the future alignment of Dean Avenue heading south from North Cass Parkway. And so it would have kind of gone over to the east and then further south into 195th Street, would have essentially created a four-way stop at 195th Street where traffic could have flowed directly in to this property on the south. That property, as you all know, is a more or less a longtime homestead for the family that lives there, and you know, it is clear that family does intend to live on that property for much, much longer. And so without substantial action being taken to facilitate that alignment, at this point it's just not a reality for the city to consider anymore as an alignment for Dean Avenue. And so staff did work with the applicant for this property to determine what would be the next logical location for Dean Avenue. And as you'll see in your packet, as it hugs I-49 as close as it can and wraps back around, it was determined that that was the best alternative to provide access from the interchange down to 195th Street.
I see. Excellent. Thank you. And I believe you said that the applicant will be giving us a presentation on the layout of the proposed area?
Correct.
Okay, so I'll reserve questions after that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions of staff at this time? Yep. Go ahead, Ms. Forster.
I'm not sure if this should be for you or for them later, because I have questions about lighting. Should I ask you, or do I wait?
I can answer them simplistically. I could say, as part of the PUD, how we would address the plans on lighting is that those would be submitted with the final building plans, and they're still must be compliant with the city code. A traditional site plan would require that photometric plan to be submitted up front, and staff would review that to determine its compliance. As part of this, staff would review that when the final building plans would be submitted to the city, and we would make the determination of what changes would need to be made.
I just want to make sure it's not going to be like a ballpark out there. I mean, I get we need there to be lighting for everyone to see what's going on, but for the residents just on the other side, like 40 acres away, I didn't know if they were talking about screening as well, or if there's going to be downlighting and stuff like that. I just want to make sure that's in the topic.
And I'll leave those answers to the applicant.
Okay. Anyone else? If not, I would ask the applicant if they'd care to step forward and make the presentation.
And if you excuse me for 1 second, I will take control of your screens one more time to go through the applicant's presentation.
Thank you.
Mayor, members of the City Council, my name is Carl Lay with Van Trust Real Estate, 4900 Main Street, Kansas City, Missouri, 64112. I'm joined here tonight by Mr. Grant Harrison, also with Van Trust, Brett Lauritsen, and Mason Olson with Olson Engineers. We're excited about what we call Raymore Commerce South as a natural extension of the Raymore Commerce Center development. We call it Raymore Commerce South for the purposes of this application, but our intent would be to brand it all together because it is a natural extension of the Commerce Center development that's already enjoying some success. And so since I'm referencing the property that's under development, I thought it'd be appropriate tonight to show just a short video from our website. It's kind of a marketing video that shows some detail about the type of buildings that we're doing and how traffic moves through those sites. So. We could kill the music. Thank you. So we like Raymore Commerce Center for its location. Certainly the KC metro area has great shipping arrangements to pretty much anywhere in the country within 2 days, 3 days max in some cases. And so this, there you go. So there's a map, kind of shows you some of the other major distribution hubs within a couple days travel of Kansas City. And we like Raymore for its position in the metro area. Very accessible to all the places that logistics and those types of facilities need. There's also a number of amenities very close by to this site, and so that's something we actually hear from a lot of the prospective tenants is what's close. And so they find that attractive. We're under construction. Building 1 has been delivered and sold to a beverage distribution company at the end of, actually in summer of 2021. Building 3 is under construction right now, and Building 1 has broken ground as well. So this just shows some of the features of the typical building and the dock areas and some of the efficiency for trucking and logistics. Like I said, Building 3 is under construction right now. We've got about a third of the roof is on. All the walls are up, of course. And we've had in the last few weeks 3 different tours for 3/4 to all of the building. We've got another tour tomorrow, I think. And then I know that Mr. Gress has also received some inquiries separate from what we've got from our brokers group. So thanks for the video, David. So there's good success. There's good momentum for this type of development. And so the PUD has been a useful tool for tenants to come in and for us to be flexible in responding to what the market's asking for. Let's go on to the next one. So again, I mentioned where Building 3 was. This was on May 11th. So again, about a third of the building is under roof right now. Highlighted in blue is the site for Raymore Commerce Center 2. It's just under 500,000 square feet, and that is under construction as well. And then in the orange is Building 1 that I mentioned was delivered last year. So the site we're talking about is to the right in this picture, and in this picture north is to the left. You see Interstate 49 there running along the property. And in the dashed circle, kind of in the lower left corner, is the interchange to Interstate 49 from Cass Parkway. So that's an important note, obviously, for logistics. That's where the trucks want to go, is to get to the interstate. And so this is just, I'll get into the site planning and the building layout a little bit further, but this just shows kind of the scale of the buildings and how they compare to Raymore Commerce Center 1 development. And then traffic flow. So there's been some discussion about how Dean Avenue and where this proposed connection will occur. So right now, Dean Avenue is a cul-de-sac that ends at Building 3, the green building. And so we propose to extend it, as shown on this drawing, kind of following the yellow line, and connect up with 195th Street. And then there is another public road that's proposed as Commerce Drive that enters also shown in yellow, that enters the development. Although there are other access points before you get to that point, and we'll show those here in a little bit as well. So I'm going to take probably spend a little bit more time on this slide. It's not as exciting and doesn't show all the buildings, but it's important to understand some of the forces that are the engineers and our team faced when laying out buildings on this property. So the first and the most significant one is the yellow line on this plan is a Southern Star high-pressure gas transmission line that's underground, and that line, we can't do any grading over it of any significance, which means we can't add a lot of dirt above it, and we certainly can't cut dirt off of that area. And so it's a very limiting factor cutting through the property. The other piece you see shaded in gray on either side of that line is some bedrock that is close to the surface. And so those are, that bedrock is in areas where we would need to cut and fill, or cut in order to fill some of the lower areas of the property. And so the lower we go, or the more we adjust there, we get into that bedrock, and that creates all kinds of other problems with efficiency. The black lines represent showing the topography. So where those black arrows begin, that's kind of the crown of the site, so the high point. And so you can see it, the ground falls away 40 feet in 3 different directions, and about 20 or 30 feet, I think, to the north. And so there's a fair amount, again, that's kind of at the top of the mountain. It's not a mountain, but the top of the crown is where we'd be taking dirt and moving it to lower areas in order to create level pads for these distribution buildings. There's also sanitary sewer that runs along I-49 and a pump station that serves that sanitary main on the south end. There's also a creek on the south end. There's also overhead transmission lines on the south end, so a lot of reasons we can't really build on the south end. But the nice thing about the creek on the south is that it's a heavily wooded area, and so it does provide a good landscape buffer to properties to the south. Along the right-hand side or the east side is the property line. That's also a wooded property line. Most of those woods are on the east side of that property, which I believe is county land. Is that correct? And so, yeah, obviously, we wouldn't be disturbing off our property. There's also underground power that serves the pump station, and there's a water main along that property line that comes from that water tower in the northeast corner. So again, these are some things that we can't move here. We cannot move that gas main. I'd love to, but it's staying where it is, and so we kind of have to work around that. So then I think the next slide will show how we laid out those buildings. So this is the same orientation, and where that gas main was, it's not drawn in here as well, but you can see just to the right is Commerce Drive. So it's if we can't change the grades, it's a logical place to put a street. And so it kind of leaves us with what land is left to the east of that property, and how we can lay buildings out. And we've got buildings D and E shown there. And if you remember the topography that I showed in the previous slide, so the gas line is kind of higher and the property line on the east is a little bit lower. And these distribution buildings, if you remember from the video, you have the finished floor of the building and you have truck docks. And so there's that's 4 feet below the finished floor of the building. So you have that, naturally the truck docks want to follow the grade. And if the grades, in this case, is falling to the east, well then the truck docks need to be on the east side in order to achieve that. We're contemplating a total of 5 buildings. Building A would be just over 600,000 square feet. Building B, 775,000 square feet. Building C, just over 1 million square feet. And then D and E are 300,000 square foot buildings each. So just over 3 million square feet is contemplated for density. And again, the thing we like about the PUD zoning is if somebody comes in and says for building C, we want 800,000 square feet expandable to 1 million, we can just do that, right? We can work with them. Or if somebody says they want buildings D and E, but they want them combined to a longer building, or they want less building, we've got the flexibility to do that as long as we stay within those square footage parameters. And that's attractive to the tenants that are out there and the businesses that are out there that are looking to locate in places like Raymore. So here's an aerial rendering of the site. Now here we're looking south, so we're probably hovering just above Building 3 in the Raymore Commerce Center, looking south. And along kind of the bottom is 195th Street, and so to the right is where it would connect up with Dean Avenue. And you can see the distance between the buildings and 195th Street. Building A on the right is just under 300 feet away from 195th Street, and buildings B and D on the left, they're 387 and I think over 400 feet away from 195th Street. So 400 feet, that's more than a football field. So we've got a good separation. The engineers have done a good job of respecting that and laying this out so that we can make use of the space. There's some detention area along the north side. Remember that, again, the crown of the site's a little bit further in, so drainage does go, some of it does go towards 195th, and we've accommodated that in that green space buffer zone. And we're proposing some, good trees, some berms where possible with trees on top, again, to provide some landscape buffer from 195th looking south. Okay, so some question was asked about, and this actually came up at Plan Commission, about some of the spacing and some of the access points to the development. So as a truck comes from I-49, Cass Parkway, heads down Dean Avenue, Dean Avenue is proposed to swoop into 195th Street smoothly. The first access point would be for Building A as you're heading from west to east. And so that would be an opportunity for Building A to have a direct shot. The second access point is a shared drive, so just between Building A and B. And that shared drive, if you kind of follow it down, it feeds Building A, Building B, and it actually feeds Building C. Now, it's possible that some of these buildings could be multi-tenant, and sometimes there's security measures between tenancies. So yeah, Building B, will all trucks going to Building B come off that site? Possibly, but possibly not off that entrance. So that's where Commerce Drive comes in. It provides a secondary access to buildings B and C, at least to the east sides of those properties. And then it also provides access to buildings D and E. And then it's important that every building have frontage to a public street. It's generally preferred to potential buyers of buildings that they have an address on a public street and that they have frontage to public street. And so that's Commerce Drive, being a public street, provides that frontage to both building C and building E. Okay, and then the question about how can we help mitigate any temptation of truck traffic to head east on 195th Street. And, so the first thing is where they want to go is to the interstate, and the easiest way to get there is to go west on 195th and follow Dean Avenue. But you might have the occasion where a truck is tempted to maybe turn right. And so the engineers came up with this solution. We've talked with staff about it as well. So what you're seeing here is an entrance. The north is up in this shot. So an entrance from, or any of the entrance or exits from our development. A truck heading north, we propose a normal curve would be a curb. Would be as shown in white, or the limits of the white. And then in light gray is where the engineers are proposing that we extend that curve and make it a tighter radius. And then heavy signage to indicate no right turn movements for truck traffic leaving the site. And so what you can see is a car, if somebody works at this building and they live east, they can certainly make that turn and go right and head east on 195th Street. But a truck is restricted by those mechanics from making that turn, and plus the sign says don't turn right. And so you can see the left turn movement's very gracious and achievable for the truck. And so we'll end with the site aerial. I think I've hit all the things we wanted to hit. Make sure we hit some of the new information that we had. And so we'll stand by with any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions of the developer at this time?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Townsend?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did have some questions for the applicant real quick. Looking at, we could probably go back to a couple of slides with their presentation. On the layout of the particular proposed area, I see that there's 5 buildings, but then when I refer back to the MOU back when it was initially put together, when Branch Road was supposed to be the T in the area, it would have split this particular parcel of land in half. So is there a driving force behind having 5 buildings in this particular area? Or is there?
Yes and no. So we're looking for a mix of, $500,000 to $750,000 to 1 million square feet is where there's been a significant amount of activity in the marketplace. And so, if you have the thought being, if you have a larger building, you can always go smaller, right? But if you have a small building and somebody comes along and they need more space, it's kind of harder to stretch it if you haven't planned for it. So we wanted to put as much density and it is reasonable that we can fit. Doesn't mean we're going to build all 3 million square feet, but kind of the idea is, how do these buildings lay out? It's also, you remember all those site forces grades, right? We could probably get more square footage if we made the whole site one level, but that doesn't really work because of some of those things I talked about with the gas main and the presence of bedrock and those types of things.
And that raises a question as well regarding the site and the infrastructure that's currently there with the water and gas and things that are already built into underground. Buildings, the east buildings, D and E, I see that the bays are facing east. And then I believe the screening, as Ms. Forster had brought up initially, is proposing to use the trees that are existing there. The trees that are there is on the county property line. That's probably a better question for staff. Or is that within your?
For the most part, the existing trees are mostly on the other side of the property.
So during construction, then those would be undisturbed and that would be left
Correct.
there. Okay, I see. Has there been any consideration to flip the building so that the bays are on the interior of the property?
Yeah, we did look at that. It becomes pretty challenging, again, because of that gas main. We can't change those grades, so we're kind of locked in, which means Commerce Drive is kind of locked in to a grade that matches the gas main. And so what would happen is if you tried to flip the building, it's like you're digging the docks into kind of the uphill side. And you're digging into rock. So you're digging into rock, but the good news is you get to build a retaining wall, and so what happens is the site becomes really unattractive to pretty much anyone wanting to use. Right? They're looking at lots of sites. A lot of these potential clients, our customers, are looking at lots of sites, and so if they see one that has a lot of gymnastics to get through, that business doesn't come to Raymore.
I see. So seeing the configuration as it is proposed, what considerations are there for the community to the east with regard to truck lights? And because if we're relying on the tree line as far as any kind of barrier, fall season, there's not much vegetation there to kind of reflect that and the noise. So what considerations have you considered?
Sure. From a lighting standpoint, so all the
Lighting and sound, I would say, as far as any kind of noise, refraction, walls and things of that sort, a berm, what has been discussed to kind of help the neighbors to your east?
So can we go to what's maybe the picture that go back, that one. So yeah, the neighbors, so you're talking the ones that's
And particularly your comments regarding the bays, they're kind of, have a slight grade towards the building, which means the headlights would be kind of aiming upward. And so I'm just considerate of the community directly to your east, even though it's a football field plus away, light's going to travel a little bit, and understand and viewing your existing property, Raymore Commerce Center North, the lighting there is while it's has a glow, it's not necessarily a pervasive, throughout the community, the surrounding area. So understand there's going to be a glow, that's going to occur should this pass. But just trying to be considerate of the actual truck traffic as they maneuver around the lot on that particular portion of the property.
right.
What have been your discussions to kind of mitigate that and the noise from that?
So as far as headlights go, so our landscaping that we would have along the east side of those buildings, if you're talking about buildings D and E, plus the existing trees on the property, on the other side of the property line, certainly would provide a great mitigation for headlights. As far as site lighting goes, the word you used is glow, and that's a good word. What we always avoid is glare. So like a football field where the lights are up, we don't want that. We don't do that. All our fixtures are cut-off fixtures, so they point down and spread out that way.
I see. The point of my question is, I would hope that you consider some sort of walling or highway walling, adding to that eastern perimeter, just to add an additional layer of protection and deflection of not only just the lighting, but also the noise. Because unlike your northern properties, you have a good amount of green space at the Raymore Commerce Center North from the neighbors to the northeast of you. This one, you don't. It's a straight line of sight. And I think as a good neighbor and good faith effort to consider adding something to that effect would help that community directly to your east to look at that and see what we can do there.
Yeah. What, do we have the distance from the building to Whitetail Run?
1,200 feet.
1,600? Okay. Yeah. I'm not sure about highway walls. I don't think I can just agree to that. That's pretty unusual for private development. If you're concerned about sound from the truck docks on buildings D and E, versus the sound that's there right now from Interstate 49. I haven't done any measurements, so I couldn't tell you. But kind of intuitively, I would think that any noise that's produced by, the slow-moving traffic on building D and E would be much less than the high-velocity noise coming from Interstate 49.
I understand that there's existing highway noise, and with the construction, should this proposal pass, the addition of these buildings in their current configuration would also add to some sound refraction. I give that as well. But I just think, in my view of this and some concerns that I've fielded from the residents in that community. Simply relying solely on the trees that are there, I don't think is sufficient to accommodate the concerns of that community and that growing community as well. So I would offer that, and I'll allow my council members who may have some further questions to also chime in. So I'll let that stew for a little bit, and then
Okay.
I'll come back at a later point. So thank you.
Mr. Holman?
Thank you, sir. So you don't seem to be amenable to a highway wall. What about something along the lines of an 8-foot vinyl fence from the northern corner of Building D along the property line south towards Building E, leaving the trees intact, of course? Would that, Reggie, you think that would make sense along there?
It would, something that's, in keeping with the surrounding community, not, an eyesore, but something that can help mitigate sound and light.
Yeah.
Okay, because again,
Fencing actually works. Yeah, that's a different story and different animal. Yeah, absolutely. Fencing, 8 foot. I think that's actually the limit that the ordinance allows, which would be fine. In fact, I think it's that, from our standpoint, also provides some security for some of these users. So no objection there.
And to be candid, in this comment, I understand that you have a profit margin you're trying to achieve. I completely get that. But as an effort of good faith to the community, if the highway wall or something to that effect is more substantial and provides a greater sound barrier in addition to lighting, I would hope that that would be the option. Because again, particularly at this phase, if you're going to come back, again, this is me, I don't know, this is still a conversation that has to occur with staff. If you're going to come back with an ask for some sorts of incentives later on, months from now, the perception is you're asking us to pay for it, and it's like, I don't want to do anything more substantial than a fence.
Yeah.
So I'm just, my comments.
Yeah, no, I think, and Grant, I don't know if you want to address that, but, or correct me if I say something wrong here, but this isn't really just about a Van Trust profit margin. So we might be selling the land as it is to an owner user, and they might want to, right? So if the land comes with strings attached that you have to build this or that, it becomes less attractive because they have a bottom line that they're trying to hit, right? And so it really isn't, I can't really spend their money by agreeing to that, if you understand. It's about making an attractive piece of land that will attract business to Raymore and make it competitive in the marketplace.
Mr. Berenson?
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. This is question time, not comment time.
Okay, fair enough.
Grant Harrison, Van Trust Real Estate.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Townsend, to your comment on the wall, I think we'll go back and explore every option. I think the berming, the landscaping, the vinyl fence, wood fence, those are pretty easy if we have space. The hard wall, the retaining wall, the highway wall is a little different animal. I think we can maybe explore that. It is a financial deal. We've already lost a couple buildings. This is probably plan 9 or 10 actually before we got here. Most all the buildings were north-south at one point. We didn't understand the transmission line. We didn't understand the rock. So there's a lot of detail and focus before we got here. But this is a plan we believe hits market, hits the returns, and respects the neighbors as best we can. Now, again, we got a ways to go with landscaping to the north, which has a lot more room, as you mentioned. But we can definitely explore different things on the east side.
I appreciate that.
So definitely not a no, just unique for us. So we got to roll our sleeves up a little bit and get creative. And one other thing is this building, those are all 300 feet deep. Building D and E doesn't mean we'll build 300 feet deep. That's about a 135-foot truck court and then trailer storage. If we build these today, which again would probably be on a spec basis, there would be no trailer storage, which is at 55 feet. So there's opportunity to tighten that berm, create a bigger buffer. It just depends on what we do and who shows up.
I see.
So nothing's really locked in.
Mr. Berenson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think most of my questions may have been kind of covered. Mr. Holman got to one of them with the fence. You mentioned a berm. From the existing drawings we have in front of us, the very east side of that parking lot, how much space is left between the east side of that parking lot and the property line? Because a berm was something I'd considered too. It appears there's not a lot of space there from this conceptual drawing.
No, to the east of the building.
You're talking about the tree line there, John?
Right, and we've got utilities in there too, so putting a berm in there, is that something that's going to be not easy to do or not even possible?
It's about 100 feet minus trees, but from back at curb to property line, about 100 feet.
Is putting a berm in lieu of a fence, is that something that you would also consider if
I was suggesting we could do a berm with a fence with landscaping on top, so that height could be
Okay.
increased pretty easily.
Because I also think, I mean, we have some stakeholders over here to the east in these homes, and I think we have an opportunity now with this PUD. You guys have been great, great so far in our city, and we've been very happy with everything you've done. But I would support this project as long as there was some sort of shielding your light pollution and noise pollution to the neighbors to the east. Thank you.
Anyone else have anything? Thank you, gentlemen. If you have nothing else, we'll go ahead and, with the public hearing is open at this time. I would entertain anybody from the public that wish to address the council at this time. Please step forward, state your name and address for the record, and try to keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. I would remind you that if you do agree or disagree with the comments that are made, and rather than repeating them, please state so on that category. And like I said, try to keep your comments to 5 minutes or less.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Zubin Talib, 19126 South Ranch Road, Raymore, Missouri. The proposed project plan works for the developer, but doesn't serve the desires or needs of the residents in the area. However, I believe it's possible to deliver a workable solution, and for me, there are 3 key ways to achieve this. First, I feel we need to eliminate or minimize traffic on 195th Street before, during, and after construction. Second, I think we should require a comprehensive landscaping plan to hide the development near houses, residential areas like 195th Street and Whitetail Run. Third, I think we need a set of guidelines to address the suitability of businesses that will operate in this area. With regards to traffic on 195th Street, about 147 people, 76 in Raymore, signed a digital petition on change.org requesting that we keep semis, trucks, and other commercial traffic off 195th Street. In addition to the noise pollution, we feel that the projected 500 additional vehicles will negatively impact traffic flow and interrupt the regular operation of school bus, parent, residential, and emergency services on this street. The current plan relies on the developer's engineering recommendation. It connects Dean to 195th Street and then has multiple entry points to the development along 195th Street. Again, this works for the property, but not for us. We desire that the commercial traffic should move inside the development and keep 195th Street clear of this traffic. Motivated engineers can do anything. We have built the Empire State Building, the Golden Gate Bridge. I think a simple connecting road is quite possible. Some suggestions as laypeople that we have are an entrance as far west as possible, with a second, if required, somewhere along 195th Street. Or a bridge exclusively for commercial traffic that goes over 195th Street at Dean Avenue and then directly into the facility. With regards to landscaping and greenery, the MOU states landscaping is required, but it doesn't specify any specific standards. The developer has stated that they don't want to cover the top of the building as they want truck drivers to see the facility. I don't feel this is a good or sufficient reason for buildings to be exposed. The warehouse should be easy enough to see from inside the facility, and with GPS and road signs, I'm fairly sure that any trucker could find it. We also believe that the city should minimally require the following for landscaping and screening: the use of berms to provide immediate height to plantings and trees. If the developer is open to this, it can easily and should be added to the MOU. We believe we need evergreen trees as well that are fast growing and have thick foliage so that we have year-round protection from the sight of these buildings, and a variety of grasses and native foliage for ground cover and to provide visual relief and interest. I also find at this point it's very fitting that we just declared Arbor Day today, and so for all of those reasons as well, I think we should take the landscaping idea a lot more to heart. Many residents have expressed their concern about property value. Landscaping can go a long way to address this concern, and an experienced landscape architect can accomplish this easily. It's not a big ask, and masking the project with trees, plants, can provide ecological, visual, and economic benefit. Implementing these standards is also an excellent opportunity for us to demonstrate how a residential and PUD zone can work together in harmony. Finally, I think the city needs to issue guidelines to attract business that is suitable to operate near residential areas. For example, it doesn't work to have 24-hour operations in a residential area, and the plan should stipulate that there may be limited hours of operation in this area, and exclude them. Large illuminated or elevated signs are incompatible with the residential area, and these should be limited to certain hours of the day or preferably prohibited altogether. And this also applies to issues with noise and particulate pollution as well. Finally, lighting systems, including street lights, should be designed to minimize the impact on residences. Measures should include turning the lights off at a certain time to reduce light pollution, but also to provide light energy savings. To conclude, this development can be achieved in a way that works for residents and the business. I ask each of you, council members, to hear my voice and that of many others, and to act and vote in a manner that allows amendment to the plans to capture our desires and make sure they are implemented in the final development. Whether this means that you defer the vote on both the plan and rezoning, or approve the rezoning but reject the plan, or make changes now and vote on it, please reflect the will of the residents of Raymore and deliver a win by providing for the 3 key areas that I identified here: to eliminate traffic on 195th Street, to use landscaping to hide the building in areas where it impacts our properties, and to limit businesses to those that are compatible with operating in a residential area next to homes and schools. I think doing this will go a long way to build community support and trust between the city, the councillors, and the residents of Raymore. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Gary Stupp. I live at 918 Kodiak Street in Raymore. Very hard to follow Zoom, and that was quite a presentation. We spoke at length during the last meeting about traffic, and we talked about 195th Street, and I brought up specifically that intersection at the North Dean extension into 195th Street. I've spoken with the people, actually with the dispatcher of the Apple Bus Company, because that was my primary concern. And he told me that he stated that most of the 100 buses travel down Peculiar Drive to 195th Street every morning, generally about 6:30. He also stated that all of their 100 buses travel the same route in the afternoon between 2 and 3. He further stated that Dean Avenue extension would help the bus company by creating a new, shorter route to pick up the children. However, this also increases the amount of traffic that would be turning left from 195th Street onto the Dean extension. I did my own personal line-of-sight analysis. I was an intel guy in the military on that piece of terrain. And doing it, heading west on 195th Street shows a line of sight that's not impacted by topography on the east side of 195th Street or foliage on the west side of 195th Street is about 192 feet. Now, at 35 miles an hour, a vehicle traveling west on 195th Street would require 169 feet, and that's per the Utah MoDOT guidance on how long it takes for vehicles, large vehicle semis, to stop. This does not include the time necessary for driver's perception and driver reaction. Also needed to be taken into account is the road between 195th Street and Dean has a downhill slope, thus increasing both braking time and distance. An assumption is that it would take a bus between 2 and 3 seconds from a complete stop to completing a left turn from 195th Street to Dean Avenue. Based on a simple calculation, a bus turning left from 195th Street to Dean Avenue at the same time a heavily loaded truck is headed west on 195th Street, continuing north on Dean Avenue, could potentially result in a broadside collision. In order to mitigate this potentially dangerous situation, the line of sight needs to be increased by grading the north side of 195th Street and removing foliage, and removing foliage on the south side of 195th Street, thus increasing the line of sight for vehicles coming west on 195th Street. That's all I have for you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else?
Good evening. Kara Sims, also representing my husband, Tom Sims, who wasn't able to make it tonight, 918 Coyote Drive, Raymore. Thank you very much, Mayor and members of the council, for hearing our concerns. We were at the meeting several years ago when this first came up. Just for a little bit of background, my husband and I moved from Belton 10 years ago. We specifically moved from Belton because the city council at that time was making some decisions that negatively impacted the community, and we sat across the table from members of the city council who looked at us and said verbatim that they understood our concerns. No, they wouldn't want that type of development near their neighborhood, but they did nothing wrong by putting it in ours. And we were very encouraged and heartened when we came to the meeting here that you guys really did listen and hear our concerns when this same issue was brought up several years ago. So thank you again for opening it up for public comment. Additionally, my husband is a Missouri State Highway Patrolman who has worked in this county for 10 years and is very familiar with the traffic patterns. He does also have his commercial vehicle enforcement training through the Missouri State Highway Patrol. Regardless of the intent of what the traffic flow will be, we all know reality does not always follow that. And there is a new brand of truck driver that does not get trained, that is certified online, and they answer several calls due to truck drivers simply following Google to a site. So regardless of the intent to not have truck drivers coming from the east, if you've got truck drivers on 291 trying to get to this area from the east, they'll just be potentially following how Google tells them to get there. They answer several calls a month in certain areas throughout the county of truck drivers who were doing just that and got stuck under a bridge where they did not have height clearance. And then lastly, as a citizen who is not as well versed in some of the acronyms that have been being thrown out tonight, what I heard from PUD is that it is a tool that will inform how this is developed. And specifically, I heard the applicant say that is a tool that will allow them to develop it in a way that is beneficial to them throughout this phase, not necessarily allowing us as a community further input if we rezone in that direction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
We can do it in our council comments, but not call them back to the answers.
Good evening. My name's Fred Stark, and I'm here representing my friends in Raymore. I'm not a Raymore resident.
What is your address, Mr. Stark?
It's 8410 Spring Valley, Belton.
Okay. Go ahead.
My question is, has the possibility of an interchange at 195th and I-49 been considered?
You'd have to ask MoDOT. We're not here to answer questions. We're here to take comments.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. All right.
Okay. Anyone else?
Good evening. Anthony Civitat, 1718 Archer Drive. So hard to follow a lot of these people. They had a lot of good points that I second. A couple things I wanted to throw out just as topics, not specifically facts per se. So one, I second the building swap, berm, et cetera, on the east side of the property. My patio faces it. I'm gonna see it every night. Two, we kind of talked about traffic turning left out of the subdivision, but we didn't talk about people coming from the south wanting to get off on Peculiar Way, taking South School Road up north, cutting over. Otherwise, going all the way to North Cass is backtrack. So I'm pretty sure everybody's GPS would tell them, get off on Peculiar, go around, go across the school. Something to think about. Turn lanes backing up. So if you guys go South School Road, the high school, all the schools on that road, go after school, all the parents, you're backed up, can't get through. Everybody drives through the turn lane to get by, highly illegal, not desirable. Is that gonna happen when we have semis trying to turn into the subdivision or the Commerce Center. And then I also heard, and maybe this is not true, that Commerce Drive was going to be a public access road. Not sure if that was a fact or not, but if it is, does that mean taxpayer dollars to repave and maintain that industrial road that's going to be tore up? Just a thought. Last thing, I was looking at one of the Raymore UDC code design books, section 440.010, and it talks about applicability. Talks about any division within 300 feet of a street designated as a city collector, minor arterial, which 195th is, and also anything within 500 feet of a residential zone property, which I believe, looking through notes, there's one 470 feet within the area. All these codes should apply. I don't see those being called out in the PUD. Things about monotone design, single building shall be avoided, long expansions of overhead doors shall be relieved, things of that nature in the code that I think are being skipped through the PUD process. So maybe something to go back through and examine all those design features that are being left out. So that's all I had.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
440.10.
I'm Sarah King, 909 Doe Drive in Raymore, and I live in the neighborhood that will fit inside two of the warehouses that they're proposing. But that neighborhood will be growing, so it's not just our little neighborhood that is going to be affected by all this. I put all of mine in the form of questions, I guess for you to think about and maybe during discussion can answer. But I'm wondering, what is the city responsible cost-wise for this project? And like for the expansion of Dean and Avenue and things like that, and how is the city's cost burden going to be paid for? What kind of revenue will the warehouses bring to the city? Why do we even want them here? Because I don't. Will the city vet any business that wants to locate in one of the warehouses? I don't want something that involves toxic waste or anything in my neighborhood. And when he mentioned that the bedrock may need to be cut, is that just a nice way of saying it'll be blasted? And then who's going to pay for damages to our foundations if that's the case? Mostly, I don't want the air pollution, the noise pollution, or the light pollution that these warehouses will produce. I'm a little concerned because it also sounds like they can't give a solid answer because they don't know who will be there and what the tenants will need. So in essence, it sounds to me like they're going to do whatever they want to do when the time comes. So I don't know if each time they plan something, they have to come to you for approval, or if once this is all approved, do they just take the ball and run? That's all. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm Kerry King, 909 Doe Drive, Raymore. That's hard to follow all that, but they pretty well stole everything from me. I was thinking maybe, if anything, interchange on I-49 at 195th Street, get with the state of Missouri, build bridge, build an extra. Even if it's too close to the other one, build a little further south, keep the traffic away from the schools. I'm worried about the fire department. 1 million square feet. If they have a call, are we prepared to do something about 1 million square feet burning? Literally. And then on top of that, you got the police department. You have to add to it. You have to add to the fire department. What's the cost to the city? Who's going to pay for it? The people. I've got one more thing. It's kind of, let me find it. That's 20 yards away from one semi at an idle. We get a whole parking lot full of them. I invite anybody in the room to come to my house, and in the time I've moved to Whitetail Run, the noise pollution from I-49 has probably increased, I'd say, at least fourfold. I sit on my deck, and I hope for windy days for it to not be noisy. But I go walk in the neighborhood, and you hear I-49. It is what it is. When I first moved there, it was like birds chirping and everything, and but it is, because it comes flowing through that alleyway where the power lines are. Increased amount of truck traffic, at least 100 per hour at times. I hear road noise all the time from I-49. And you go and increasing it, and it's like, yeah. Anyway, thank you for your
All right,
time.
thank you, sir. Anyone else? Anyone else?
I see no one coming forward, so I'll close the public hearing at this time. And are there any additional questions from the council for the staff or the applicant? Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is for staff. If we were to not change the zoning on this, and I pretty well know the answer, but in 2013, I was in planning and zoning when they wanted to put warehousing here, and it was going to be metal buildings, and at the time, I didn't think it sounded good either. In the time period since then, I had a topographic map produced of that hill, of the whole city. I looked at it a lot last week. I looked at it about 6 months ago and actually got out of my car and stood between the houses and looked down the hill, wondering what those corrugated metal buildings would be like from 10 years ago if we had done them. But to my question for you, if there is no change, couldn't an applicant come in and put those type of metal buildings in a business park?
That is correct, sir. And to kind of compare the process of what the existing zoning would allow versus what's being proposed, I can kind of give a background on that. In essence, under the existing business park zoning, warehousing and wholesaling, which would be the primary use for what would be targeted on this, in addition to some maybe advanced manufacturing and those types of jobs. But the primary use is warehousing, for lack of a better term. Under the business park zoning, that is a conditional use, and that's important to know. Under the existing zoning, the applicant could proceed with any number of layouts or site plans that, as long as they meet the minimum standards that the business park district outlays, that would be an approvable site plan by the Planning Commission. And the way site plans are reviewed is that the Planning Commission is the governing body for that type of application, and so they hold the decision, if you will, on whether or not that's an acceptable site plan. If that site plan were to be approved, the applicant would then come forward on, in this case, 5 individual cases, or maybe more if some of these buildings ended up being a multi-tenant. And each individual request would be essentially for a conditional use if the use were to be warehousing. But there are also a number of uses in the existing business park zoning that would be just allowed by right. And give me 1 second while I flip to that section of the code. So under the existing zoning, limited manufacturing per se is a permitted use, and so that could go in this, pending the site plan approval under the business park zoning district, would be permitted use. And so there would be no further review authority by the planning and zoning or the city council at that point. The other thing to point out is that there is a couple of waste-related uses that would be permitted within that. For the most part, though, the use standards have not changed. The only change is that the warehousing becomes a permitted use as opposed to a conditional. So the development could still be accomplished under the existing business park zoning. The difference is that as each tenant would come forward for a building, they would have to request a conditional use permit by the city. The challenge becomes when you compare the previous development that you were involved in 2013, which was probably 2,000, 3,000 square foot metal buildings, quite a bit different than the tenants that would be going into a building like this. When staff responds to requests from tenants that are looking for space in the Kansas City metro in general, Raymore does fall on that list pretty high in most cases. But when you look at a tenant that's looking for a building, at the same time, they're also looking at probably 5 or 6 other cities, and usually 1 or 2 other states as well. And what they're looking for is the best building they can find that meets their specific needs. And so the flexibility that the PUD affords is that the Planning and Zoning Commission and the council outline the box, if you will, or the envelope for what this site can support. It's just over 3 million square feet for this property, spread across generally 5 buildings. The challenge that the city would run into in responding to those projects is that without knowing what the permitted uses are outright, that's generally another 60 to 75 days worth of review and approval by staff and the applicant. We would stand to get really kicked off that list of potential sites almost every time because a developer's looking, or a tenant, I'm sorry, is looking for basically a reason to say no for a location where they're wanting to be. And so that, when you look at Raymore Commerce Center 1, that is why that site has become so attractive, is because the city has outlined what the expectations are and what the rules, if you will, for that development. And they're outlined in the MOU, and they're spelled out clearly. And so what would happen is a tenant would respond or choose Raymore Commerce Center as a building. They may have some specific needs, and so the applicant mentioned that maybe the 600,000 square foot building has to become 700,000 square foot building. Under the current zoning district, again, that's an amendment to the existing plan that would have to come back through the review process. Under the PUD, it affords that flexibility to staff to review that final building plan and make sure that it complies with the standards that were proposed under the PUD. If they do, staff has the ability to approve that amendment, and I'll give the example of Raymore Commerce Center 1. That site was originally approved as 4 separate buildings of just under, I think, 1.75 million square feet. As the council knows, buildings 3 and 4 have now been combined into 1 million square feet to build that building, and that was something that staff looked at. We were able to determine that combining those 2 buildings together still met the intent and the square footage that was originally approved, and so we could approve that application. I'll give the example that hypothetically, if the applicant came back tomorrow and said, well, we would rather build 8 million square feet on this site, that not feasible, but the theory being that that's a substantial change from what has been presented as part of this rezoning request, and so we would require that to come back through the process from P&Z and through the city council to be changed. As the applicant mentioned, it's always easier to shrink those buildings and stay within that footprint that has been approved as part of this application, as opposed to increasing it. So there's a process that they would have to go back through to change that if that were to be increased. But to answer your question, the use of the property could be accommodated through the business park district, but staff believes that the PUD is a much better tool to accomplish that. It outlines the expectations both within the UDC, but the MOU also affords the council and the city the ability to add additional stipulations perhaps that couldn't be accommodated under the existing minimum standards that the business park district outlines in the code.
Mr. Burke, do you have a follow-up?
I have a second question, actually. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is for the chief. I have not driven down past Bridle Ridge for quite a few years, actually since they did the school road project, when I had to go that way. For 3 years. It was insufferable, but anyway. I've driven that road every morning with amateur drivers for 25 years. Anyway, Bridle Ridge, isn't it typically in the afternoon when the parents try to pick up their children? Is it still where the road is completely blocked by drivers?
Yes.
So that's going to happen whether or not anything is developed down the road at all, because it has been happening since the school's been there. So that still occurs on a daily basis. Okay, so if I was a truck driver, if I was any kind of driver, there's no way I would ever go towards that. I would always go away from that because it's a nightmare. Because there's so many people. You always want to go, just like fluids in a pipe, it's going to go away from where there's the density. So I thank you for answering that question.
Anyone else have a question? Ms. Forster?
Where to start? Just to try to get some of what they were asking. I think they brought up some really good questions. The sight line, I would love to hear feedback on that, on if whenever turning, because we are talking about kids at that point. So making sure that a heavily loaded semi is turning. I don't know if anybody's looked into that, maybe? I don't know who to address that question to.
Mr. Kras?
The proposed realignment, actually, it's a combination of things. The extension of Dean Avenue actually becomes the primary road. So Dean Avenue comes south, and then there's a curve where it turns into 195th Street. So it's a continuous road, and then 195th Street tees into Dean Avenue. So that there's really not a need for the left turning movement there unless they're going on north on Dean Avenue. But the proposal has looked at increase, because there are some very difficult sight lines there, but the realignment of Dean Avenue, or the extension of Dean Avenue, addresses all of those.
So you're saying you don't think that the buses will go into the?
I think the sight line issue, I think most of the buses are going towards the school or back to the bus barn, and if they're going to the bus barn, then they're going up and following 195th Dean Avenue to North Cass Parkway. So I don't see the turning movement conflict there. Plus, the plan that the developer has proposed addresses all of the sight distance issues and the topography at that intersection.
Oh, okay. And then my next question would be on the MOU. You're saying we get to build the box, but then as long as they play in the box, it's fine. Then couldn't we add the landscaping concern along to protect the residents?
So to add to that, it was, within the MOU, there's a lot of references to other code sections within the UDC. And so as it's been proposed, the proposed plan does meet what the minimum requirements would be as part of any zoning district other than the PUD. And on top of that, in light of the concerns that we heard about the landscaping, the developer has already exceeded what those requirements would be. Again, there's references in the MOU that don't specifically spell out those requirements, but they cross-reference the UDC. Otherwise, this would be a 200-page document per se. And so, one of the things that was brought up were the landscaping requirements. Again, those have been exceeded as part of this. What you do not see on the plan before you is those final plans, because as part of the PUD, they would submit those as part of the final building plan process, and staff would review that to make sure they're consistent with what was proposed as part of this. And I think the confusion within that is that the MOU is in addition to the UDC in some cases, not in place of the UDC, which is why you see there's a lot of references to Section 430, which is the landscaping section of the Unified Development Code. And so a lot of that is addressed within MOU, maybe not specifically, but again, as staff would evaluate any of these final building plans, we would benchmark what was proposed as part of this to make sure that it meets what was proposed. And it sounds like even the developer is open to adding to that even more with some additional berms. And any of those changes would be then reflected in the MOU as additions to that beyond what the council is seeing this evening.
And then one last question, and then I'll share. Again, with the MOU, I know with the previous project, we've said this business can't be here, this business can't be here. Like, we've actually had where it narrows it down. So in their concern, is that something that could be in this as well, or no?
What we've restricted recently was more or less uses, and that was specific to a retail area that was directly adjacent to a number of homes. And that was things like adult businesses or pawn shops or what would be considered not non-conforming uses, but not uses you would traditionally see right next to a residential neighborhood. With this specific, the use is generally defined as warehousing and wholesaling. And so I can't speak for the developer, but I don't know, the city would have some oversight essentially on what business would eventually move into these, as with the MOU in the instance that, I'll use the example of Building 1 within the Commerce Center. Since that building was purchased, the developer had to reassign the terms of the MOU that was approved as part of that to the new owner of it. They still have to comply with what was approved as part of that. And there's a process that contemplates the city signing off on that and reassigning those the rules of the development to the new owner. Generally, the same thing would apply to a tenant of that facility as well. I don't know if the city would want to get into an area where we prohibit per specific companies, but when you look at the use table, certainly things like heavy manufacturing where chemicals or oils or heavy pollutants, that's not even allowed in this, as you know, as outlined in the Unified Development Code. It's limited manufacturing, meaning it would be things like I'll use the example, assembly of toys, for example, where the parts are generally made somewhere else, they're shipped in, and they're assembled in that facility. And so staff feels that the general use of warehousing, again, is the primary use. It would then be individual companies that would use this space for their warehousing needs. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, because similar to what I was understanding, like with what King was saying, like waste, this can't have waste, like this, that's not part of where what can
Correct.
a company can move in.
Correct. And as you see on page 10 there in the staff report, manufacturing is broken up into limited, general, and intensive. Limited is the only thing that would be permitted, and that's currently permitted in the business park zoning district. There have been a couple projects that staff has responded to that would be generally classified as general manufacturing, but we made the decision to identify that as a conditional use, meaning if a company were to seek a building in this space, they would have to seek approval from the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council before that would be allowed. And so staff feels that protection has been built into the PUD as it's been proposed.
Anyone else? Mr. Townsend?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question for staff, Mr. Furbo and Mr. Krass. I don't know which one to pose this question to. As I contemplate a motion, with respect to traffic movement, commercial traffic movement, truck movement on 195th, are we able to codify a law that says, I know there's some mitigation plans that they are proposing, but to, make it illegal to go east on 195th, what would that look like? And the contrary, what would that impact as far as, someone who's moving out of Whitetail that hires an actual moving truck of that size to pack up their home? What would that impact that commercial business going to actually move them if we have a similar type law restricting commercial traffic from their facility?
I sense two questions that staff has researched. Yes, it could be not just signage, but it could be illegal to come out of the park and go east. And so the signage would not only have the arrow with the red line through it, but it would also reference the section of code that makes that illegal. Lost truckers, the coming in from the east, we could codify a law, as has been contemplated before or brought up by the council before, for an axle width or a vehicle weight limit that is not allowed on School Road. There are a lot more buses on School Road than are being contemplated for 195th Street. So that could be in, again, one of the reasons that the chief knows that the traffic issue still exists at most of the elementary schools, as a matter of fact, within the school district at drop-off time, is because in all of the school zones we have a regular presence of officers. So somebody coming east during that time, twice a day we have an officer out there who would note that and would be pulling people over. Same thing would exist on School Road if we codified a law. I hope that answers your question, sir.
It does, thank you. It makes it difficult to try to figure out a motion if the mayor, when he's at that point. Thank you, sir.
You got another question, though? Anybody? Ms. Abdelwad, did you have one? No? Mr. Burke, did you have one?
I was trying to find out if Apple Bus Company has been sold. I'm looking at the contract. I haven't had time to read it yet, but I don't think that Apple Bus Company is going to be the bus provider for Ray-Pec next year. And if they are, I'm pretty sure they were purchased by another larger bus company, which would mean that issue with the bus lot being over by Mego probably would not be an issue if that's the case. I'll research that and come back.
All right, thank you, sir. Ms. Abdelwad. Yes.
I'm just wondering, so thinking about making it illegal to drive trucks on 195th is not making sense to me. A few reasons. Number one, to think of a police officer trying to pull over a semi on that street would be very unsafe for the semi, for the police officer, and for anyone trying to pass. So that worries me a lot. But I feel like if I'm a business owner in that location and I know trucks are going to be coming to my business, most likely I'm going to be giving instructions to the people that I'm doing business with. So I'm wondering how often that would really be a problem. And I do understand that people Google how to get places, but I also really believe that the businesses that are going to be there, especially knowing that this street isn't safe for truck drivers and that they're going to prefer them to take the other route. It's going to be easier for them to get in and out of the property. I mean, I just really feel like the people who are doing business there are going to have a hand in helping to solve this problem without the city needing to take that step to make it illegal to drive on a truck on that road. Sorry, that was a comment,
okay.
not really a
Thank you.
question.
I understand, yeah. Anybody have anything else? Mr. Holman?
Thank you, sir. So based on everything I've heard, the zoning request seems reasonable. It seems like a better zoning for this area than the standard business park, based on what Mr. Gress has outlined. And we've heard a number of concerns about specific possibilities, light pollution, noise pollution, traffic issues, which really seem to be step 2 as part of this process. So, Mr. Gress, would you be so kind as just to kind of explain to us if the zoning were to be approved, what hold does the city, we have final plat, I believe, that's the next step of this? Because PUD is in here, we don't have preliminary plat on this. Final plat would be one, as well as staff review of any type of actual building site plans and that kind of thing, if you wouldn't mind, sir.
Yes, you are correct. As it's contemplated with the proposed zoning is that staff would review the final building plans that would be submitted for any of these buildings that are proposed. And as long as they're consistent with what's been proposed, staff has the ability to approve those. What you see before you really constitutes the preliminary site plan for the entire development. And as long as that's implemented as generally proposed, staff has the ability to approve those. What the council and the commission would see, which you'll see later this evening, would be the final development plan or the final plat, if you will, when these lots are eventually split off into individual buildings, individual properties. And so that would be, again, the balance, if you will, against the plan to make sure that what does get built is, or what's being proposed is what gets built. The key thing about a PUD is that you're not just approving the zoning of the property like you would if this were to be rezoned to an M1 or some other standard zoning district. What's different is that you're approving the development plan. So again, the community knows what it will be developed as. As I mentioned before, if we were to proceed forward with the business park zoning, there's probably 100 different combinations and building sizes that could be done that would just be approved by the planning commission. And so it does provide an extra step that this will finally eventually make it to the council when these final building sizes and dimensions are chosen as part of the building plan process.
Ms. Abdel,
One other quick question. So I'm not gifted in visualizing space of land. So looking at these maps and imagining how much actual space is between this development and any residences, I'll just admit it's kind of challenging to me. So I looked on my Google map and just kind of tried to compare it. It looks like the distance from my house to J Highway and my house to the Rec Park ball fields is about equal to the distance between this property line and any residence, buffered by some land that someone else owns. So I'm wondering if you could, and this kind of puts you on the spot, but giving me an idea of a business in town that has residences closer than this would be to residences that would have high traffic. Like I'm thinking Sam's Club. There are lots of trucks that go into Sam's Club, and what would be a comparable distance or something closer to kind of give me an idea of other houses within a similar distance to truck traffic?
Good question. I hope that I can answer it accurately on the spot. But as you mentioned, Sam's Club, the Raymore Galleria would be a good example. That's what would be referred to as a power center in terms of a shopping center, kind of the classification. There's 3 very large anchor tenants there and a bunch of supporting retail tenants. And so you do see a lot of delivery traffic there. off the top of my head, I would guess that the proximity of where those businesses are to the closest home would probably be 100 feet or less, plus or minus. Within that are various screening requirements, whether it's a type A or a type C or a type B. That's defined in the zoning code. On the bigger picture, though, you do see along 58 Highway, residences and neighborhoods are often a lot closer than what's being proposed here. I think the applicant mentioned that from the road alone to the nearest point of some of these buildings is upwards of 300 feet from 195th Street. And then I believe the distance from property line, the eastern property line over to Whitetail Run is just under, I believe it's 1,080 feet, plus or minus, of separation there with the tree line. The difference being, I guess I could say, is that you'd be comparing kind of the primary use of the gallery is retail, and so that's generally the nature of all that traffic, but you do have substantial truck traffic with Sam's Club, Lowe's, Walmart. You do see trucks entering Dean Avenue all times of the day there and interfering with passenger vehicles and other traffic that's along Dean Avenue.
Just a quick follow-up. Sure. So thinking about all the truck traffic, and again, you may not know the answer to this question, how would the amount of truck traffic going into Sam's Club and Walmart and the Galleria compare with the truck traffic we expect at this property?
I would say in terms of the frequency of it, times of the day would probably be similar. The quantity is what would be the largest, and I know the applicant has done a traffic study as part of this, and I think at P&Z it was at peak hour would generally be about 100 trucks and about 400 cars, passenger cars, for the employees at peak hours of the day. What I wanted to shed light on too, kind of how that would relate with the school traffic. We did do some additional research as part of this, and while there are bus traffic that leave the bus barn that go to other schools, Bridle Ridge specifically has between 6 and 8 school buses on any given day, depending on attendance. And those buses are generally there between 8:05 and 8:15 in the morning, and I think it was 4:05 and 4:15 in the afternoon. Those buses primarily approach the school from J Highway, coming from the middle school campus, and then head west on 185th Street. If you look at the attendance boundaries for this area, Bridle Ridge Elementary is actually further attended in the peculiar area of Raymore. There are some Raymore residents and Belton residents that attend, but the bulk of those students do come from south and east of the site. But back to your question on comparing truck traffic, I would say it would be an increase from what you would see at the Galleria. Again, the primary use there is retail, so you do see more passenger vehicles. I don't know the specific percentage to give you an exact answer, but I would expect it to be substantially more.
And frankly, from a personal observation, if you haven't had a chance to go to North Point, they have 3 operational warehouses, operations, and a fulfillment center there. And the traffic in and out of there, if you get a chance over the next 3 weeks before we consider the second reading on this, if the first one comes up, I think would be enlightening, because the traffic is spread out through a long period of time. There's not really peak hours for operational use there, except for the workers that come and go when their hours are done. So it's really pretty interesting to see how it is a manageable process.
Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
If I could also add to Mr. Gress's comments, some of it is a little bit difficult, as you can imagine, to predict, because the applicant does not know who's going to be in a building. It could be a building, trying to give the council conservative numbers here, but a manufacturing building isn't necessarily going to have as many trucks. It's going to have more cars. So there's kind of a mix and match there that becomes mostly science, but a little bit of prediction.
Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm going to dovetail on your comments. Just proximity where I live, I use 155th Street quite often. That's my way to get in and out of the Raymore in the neighborhood. And so when North Point went in, I thought, oh boy, I'm going to be fighting semi-trucks coming home and leaving. And I can only think of maybe 1 or 2 times that I've not run into, but had a semi that come through the roundabout. So these facilities, and I've watched those very closely, they don't all come at the same time.
They don't all leave at the same time. They come in at different stages. Some of the trucks come in and drop off a trailer and leave and go pick up another trailer and go somewhere else. So it's just kind of it's different. I mean, I've never really been around or seen anything like that before, but when you look at it, you see. I will say where you do see some traffic is I've taken my wife to the airport, and I can tell you about what time when the shift changes and people leave those facilities. You do have some traffic there. I'll admit that, but those are vehicles and those are people going home or coming into work. But as far as the tractor-trailer traffic, the problem that I thought would be, I've not seen that. And I think all those but one building they're actively using at North Point, aren't they? They've just built the last one. Is that correct?
The last one I don't think is actively being used
Right,
along.
right. And I don't think they can use 155th Street. They still have to go down and go through the frontage and go through the roundabout. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Anyone else? To give one last opportunity for Mr. Harrison and his team, do you have anything that you'd care to provide to the council tonight in response to some of the items that were brought up this evening?
No, again, appreciate the opportunity to be here. We do really appreciate Phase 1. We don't say this often, but this has been a great city to be a partner with. We've studied this a lot. We can continue to study it, and I'm confident we can come up with good solutions for landscaping, berming, some screening. As we've said, we're kind of guessing who's coming. We've done about 50 million square feet across the country. These are good companies. They all have different traffic patterns, different employee counts. All that we can solve with staff. And again, appreciate your consideration, and we'll keep digging into this if needed. But excited to be here and hope to continue doing development in Raymore. So appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. If there's nothing further, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
bear with me as I talk through my motion here this evening. There's been a few conversations about a lot of things tonight, and I think the overarching concerns is with respect to the property, is traffic and sight lines with regard to that. So I believe, should the council have any additional they would like to add to my motion, is to table, because to allow the developer due diligence to evaluate adding high wall, or screening of some berm of some sort on the eastern property line, and then also including in the plans the traffic mitigation and plan defining that as far as the left turn, right turns, and the curbing, and working with staff to determine what's most appropriate in the development agreement or in the MOU, that should be documented. And then at the same token, once that is defined and brought back, 15 days notice, so that allow the public the opportunity to understand there's a notice up and to be able to come back for a public hearing and to extend this public hearing until that time.
Okay. So without the conditions that you brought in, there's a motion to table this item for further consideration of the items you brought forward, along with continuing the public hearing.
Yes, sir.
Is that good, Mr. Zur?
You'll actually have to reopen the public hearing, but yes, that'd be technically what you're doing.
Okay.
With a 15-day notice.
Right.
Can I, on the fly, maybe suggest the motion?
Yes, sir, please do.
And then,
Please.
if the council is okay with that, I think, it would be to table Bill 3725 to permit staff and the developer to address council concerns relative to traffic mitigation and berming and landscaping.
Yes.
And to provide 15-day notice to the public of the date when this would be removed and considered by the council.
Removed from the table, right?
Yes, sir. Removed from the table and reconsidered by the council and at that date to reopen the public hearing to allow for public input on the amended plan as provided this evening.
So moved.
I'm not even going to try to repeat it. It's on the record. Is there a second?
That was a great motion, Reggie. I'll second it, sir.
Motion's made and seconded to table Bill 3725 with the stipulations as outlined by Mr. Fearborn. Since the tabling motion has no discussion, all those in favor? Opposed? Tabling motion carries with 5 yes and 3 noes. I almost got to vote. All right, move on to the next item. Could I please have the first reading of Bill 3724 by title only?
The first reading of Bill 3724 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, approving the Raymore Commerce Center second final plat, lots 2 and 3.
Thank you. Is there a staff report?
Thank you, Your Honor. I would ask Mr. Gress to make a staff report on this item.
Thank you, sir. Moving a little bit to the north, back in the Raymore Commerce Center Phase 1, as the applicant mentioned earlier, building number 3 is approaching substantial completion, and building number 2, a permit was issued for that in the last couple of weeks. Currently, as it stands right now, these 2 lots are platted as one singular lot. It was split off from the Raymore Commerce Center first plat, which was approved earlier last year for building 1. So the action this evening is to further subdivide that remaining land into 2 separate lots to facilitate the continued construction of the 2 remaining buildings as part of that. The subject property is just under 90 acres, and again, it would permit 2 additional lots within that subdivision to be split off. As I mentioned, the PUD zoning for this property was achieved in December of 2019, and that included also the approval of the preliminary development plan. The Raymore Commerce Center first plat was approved on December 21st of 2020, and that only included Lot 1. The right-of-way for Dean Avenue, which has been fully constructed, was dedicated as a separate plat for simply just the right-of-way. And so again, staff feels that this second plat generally completes the subdivision while the construction of the building 2 and 3 would continue. At their May 17th meeting, the Planning and Zoning Commission voted 7-0 to 1 to approve this, recommend approval of it. I'm sorry, there was 1 abstention, and I'll explain that the commission approved that as part of the consent agenda, which also had the minutes from the previous meeting, and so 1 commissioner decided to recuse himself as part of that since he was not at that previous meeting. So that explains the outcome of that vote. Again, staff did provide their findings of fact as well as the Planning Commission, but staff would recommend that the City Council accept the findings of fact and approve case 22013 Raymore Commerce Center second plat upon first reading. That concludes my staff report.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? Does that applicant have the presentation at all on this particular topic? Nope. Staff did it good? Okay. All right. Any questions of staff again, as I asked? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
I move that we approve the first reading of Bill 3724, Raymore Commerce Center second final plat for lots 2 and 3.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Yes, sir. I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the first reading of Bill 3724. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 8-0. Thank you. Could I please have the first reading of Bill 3726 by title only?
The first reading of Bill 3726 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with Hedinger Excavating LLC for the 2022 fire hydrant replacement project, city project number 22407501, for the negotiated amount of $135,725, and authorizing the city manager to approve change orders within established budget constraints.
Thank you. Is there a staff report?
Thank you, sir. I would ask Mr. Krass to make the staff report on this agenda item.
Thank you, Mr. Fearborn, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. During the routine maintenance activities for the operations and maintenance department, we flush water mains. In order to do that, we open up hydrants and check their operability. Also, we have a valve exercising program, and so as the crew does this, they note hydrants or valves that have operational issues. typically with a hydrant, it'll be difficult to open it, or closing it, it may not seat real well, and it'll continue leaking. These are still serviceable. They'll meet the needs for emergencies, but they do need to be replaced. We do recommend awarding the contract to Henninger Excavating. Henninger Excavating has some history with us. They a while ago, they did the Johnson Drive water main replacement project, and they also did a Silvertop Lane. They did a sanitary sewer replacement project. Both projects were very satisfactory, so we do recommend award of the contract to them. That concludes my staff report.
Mike, does this include the purchase of the new hydrants as well, or is it all just their work?
It's furnish and install.
Furnished and installed, okay. Thank you. Any questions of staff? Mr. Barber?
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm just curious, do we trade the old fire hydrants in, or do we keep those?
The material becomes property of the contractor.
No, it does. Well, you know, with the coming dog part, I know Nathan could commandeer a couple, 3 of those, because they do work.
We might get him to donate a couple. Anything else? If not, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
I move that we approve the first reading of Bill 3726, award of contract for the 2022 fire hydrant replacement project.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the first reading of Bill 3726. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 8-0. That concludes new business. We'll now move on to public comments. If anyone from the public would like to address the council at this time, please step forward, state your name and address for the record, and try to keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. I see no one coming forward. We'll move on to the mayor-council communication. And Ms. Wills, I'll start with you tonight.
Thank you very much, sir. I am super excited about summer and all of the great activities that are available to our community. Farmers Market is my personal favorite, but I know that the Splash Park at TB Hanna is always super busy, and the shows and movie night are always a huge success. So thank you to our Parks Department for doing such a great job with those things. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Abdelgawad.
Nothing tonight, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Holman.
Just like to echo my condolences and sympathies to the Melville family and all of city staff, who obviously were friends of Mr. Melville. And I know this is a trying time, sir. That's all I have.
Yep. Thank you, sir. Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to congratulate all the RAPEC graduates last year. I know some people in the room had some family members that they're proud of, and it really was. It was. I've been at RAPEC a long time, and it was the first time we've ever had everyone graduate at the stadium at the same time, and it was really kind of cool. I felt really proud to be a member of the staff. I really feel like that we've done a lot of good things over the years that I've been there, and it was a great day for Raymore and Peculiar as well, and our other surrounding communities. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Your Honor. I, too, want to send my condolences to the Melville family. I think Mr. Fairborn told me today that he started on the same day. Is that correct, Mr. Fairborn?
I started on a Wednesday. Pat started the following Monday, and we took our orientation together.
So a lot of history with Raymore. Sorry to lose him, and he will surely be missed. Couple things I wanted to talk about, too. I'm glad that it passed the Ward Road, moving forward with that. We had a lot of talk about road safety tonight and different things, and that's the main purpose of that road improvement is the safety of our citizens. I got lectured long ago that our citizens, our roads, our Raymore roads need to be at a certain standard, and our citizens need to have that expectation, and we shouldn't depend on anybody else for doing that. And I know the county's pitching in a little bit, but that soon will be ours, hopefully, if everything moves forward on that. I wanted to also talk about my not supporting tabling the project tonight. My comment or feel is that staff had done a good job. I think the PUD with the MOU, along with the partner Van Trust, they've done an excellent job, been an excellent partner with the city of Raymore, and that development that they've done has met very high standards. And I've done some research on them, and all of their facilities are like that. We're not just, Raymore's not an exception. They're all that way. And I was confident that staff, along with Van Trust, would put together the needs that needed to make that a successful development. And I know there was concerns, as there would be, but I think they would have been addressed, and I think we could have moved forward with that. So that's the reason I didn't support tabling it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Berenson.
No comments from me tonight, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A lot of comments tonight, a lot of good discussion tonight, and I appreciate Mr. Barber's comments tonight. My purpose for tabling it is I wanted to make sure the applicant had adequate time to kind of back and put some documentation in place, to answer the concerns of the community with respect to that, and as well as my concerns. I also would like to extend condolences to the family as well for the loss, and just offer up to the community, even as our public works are out and about and our city staff are out and about, maybe a little slower answering the call because, they're dealing with an untimely loss of a friend, of a peer. So have some grace, have some compassion as they deal with this difficult time right now. And also on a positive note, one of our P&Z commissioners, if you didn't happen to catch it, Mr. Mario Aquila was in the Kansas City Business Journal as one of the 20 to know in the, the banking industry for his role in community development officer within Lee Bank. So within the Kansas City metro region, our own Commissioner of Planning and Zoning was notarized in that publication. So congratulations to him. I just want to make that public. He was humble, didn't mention it at the P&Z meeting the other night, but I definitely want to make sure that got recognized for his accomplishments there, representing the city in that aspect. So outstanding on that part. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, sir. And Ms. Forster.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to also give my condolences to the Public Works and to the family. It seemed, from what I understood, that it was very unexpected, and that's always the worst kind. So sincere condolences for that. I wanted to comment just that I'm really excited about that Creekside and the Hawk Nest are kind of working together. That just shows how the small businesses around here really try to step up and make a difference, and I hope there's more continuance of that, of not just big businesses that we've been talking about tonight, but also the small ones, the mom and pops and stuff like that. And I also I'm glad we tabled it tonight because I think there needs to be more discussion. I do think staff did a great job, and I just think some things were brought to light tonight that we just want to make sure we're confident before we step forward. So great job to you guys. Just need a little bit more time finessing, making it perfect. So thank you.
Thank you. I really don't have anything to add to this tonight other than to, again, offer my condolences to the Melville family and to Mike and your team. I know they're hurting right now. Tell them we're thinking about them, okay? And that's all I have. We have no reason to move into executive session tonight, sir, so I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr.
Move that
Townsend.
we're adjourned from the regular city council meeting for May the 23rd.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Motion's been made and seconded for adjournment of this meeting. All those in favor? 8 yeses. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.